Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 438. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I'm talking with Jenny Mowbray about solo travel when you're in a committed relationship. Now, this is a topic that I've been wanting to discuss for a while, but I didn't just want to provide my own perspective. I think if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know how much I love solo travel. I go on my solo camping trips. I go on my solo hiking trips. I do my solo workations, and that's been a big part of my life for the last few years. But I know that's not normal for everyone. And I know that because every once in a while when I do a podcast episode on someone else's show talking about workations, inevitably someone says to me, "What does your husband think about that?" And he's super supportive. But not everyone is. So Jenny has some great tips for people who are in a committed relationship and want to travel solo. Now, whether you're an experienced solo traveler or you're curious about how to get started, you will get something out of this episode. And I really hope that with this conversation, we planted some seeds in people's minds about how they can travel solo, even if they're in a relationship. So who is Jenny Mowbray? Jenny is a passionate advocate of embarking on solo travel adventures when in a relationship. Having traveled solo when she was single, she was surprised by the curious reaction she received from family and friends when she continued to enjoy solo trips after she met her partner. Such was her fascination that she has begun to write about the topic on her blog, Orchids to Olives. Jenny believes wholeheartedly that after overcoming initial barriers that the idea of solo travel sometimes presents, it holds many benefits on both a personal and relationship level and can deepen the connection with ourselves and our loved ones. You can find her website at orchids-to-olives.com. She's also on Instagram at Orchids to Olives, Pinterest at Jenny Orchids, and Facebook Orchids to Olives. All of those links will be in the show notes, but I wanted to mention those so you know where to find her online because we first met on Instagram. So, what are you going to learn in this week's episode? We discuss how solo travel benefits us on a personal level, how solo travel can actually help our relationship too. We discuss common fears that people who are in a committed relationship have about solo travel, the misunderstandings that can arise when one partner wants to travel solo, how to work through any fears and challenges around solo travel when you're in a relationship, how to alleviate your partner's anxiety when you're away, how to handle communication with your partner when you're traveling solo, and finally, Jenny's top tips for people in relationships who want to travel solo but are afraid to approach the topic. I really hope you enjoy this episode, and I really hope that if you've had secret dreams of traveling solo but you're afraid to bring it up to your partner, I hope that this conversation inspires you to give yourself permission to have that conversation and to get started on solo travel. Remember, you don't have to go away for like a month and a half. You can go away for a weekend on your own. Start small. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Hello, Jenny. How are you doing today?
Hi, Holly. I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, wanting to either blog about it or talk about it on the show. And then when I found you on Instagram, I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Good. So we're here to talk about solo travel when you're in a relationship. Why is this such an important topic for you?
Well, it's a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. And I think my interest was sparked when I moved from being single into being a relationship. When I was single, I had traveled solo quite often. And then when I moved into a relationship, when I was talking to family and friends about it, there was this expectation that I would stop. And that surprised me. I'd kind of changed my career, and solo travel is a big part of who I am.
Hmm.
And so it was a real surprise. There was like this expectation that I would stop.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it's very common for both men and women, but I think especially for women.
But especially for women, yeah. One of the things I started to explain the benefits to friends, and that sounds pretty cool. And I was like, yeah. And I was talking about it a bit more about what some of the benefits were to both on a personal level and both in a relationship. Sometimes I would get the response of, oh, well, I'd quite like to try that. And I was like, well, go do it then. But the immediate reaction was quite often was, no, 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 it's not for me. It's okay for you to do it, but it's not okay for me to do it. And these were women who I saw as strong, independent women with careers. Maybe they've had babies. And yet, when it came to sort of solo travel, it was a bit of a no-no. And so it was a bit of a question mark and something that I wanted to explore, because I couldn't quite understand why being able to travel solo when you're single is okay, but when it comes to a relationship, it's not so straightforward.
So why do you think it's like the cool thing to travel solo if you're single, but kind of a no-no if you're in a relationship?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with the notion that it's not what couples do.
Hmm.
I think we have quite a powerful constraining notion that it's okay if you're single, but not if you're in a relationship. And I think it's quite reasonable to say that most days it's regarded as pretty healthy to have
Mhm.
separate interests and different friends and different holiday. Going on holiday with friends is okay, but then if it's solo, not so okay.
Mhm.
And I remember one woman that I was talking to on this subject, and she was really interested in solo travel, and she spoke to her husband about it. And when she broached it with her husband, he was mortified. He started crying, and he presumed that the reason that she wanted to go away was because there was something wrong with the relationship. He felt sure
Mm.
she must be looking for a way out. And it took quite a lot of her kind of talking and explaining her reasons, that there were nothing to do with their relationship per se. It was about her needing to do something for herself. And so I think that solo travel is kind of massively misunderstood when it comes to relationships.
And I think that's a really good point because I think different people see solo travel as different things. And I would be horrified if my husband, started crying because he was afraid that I wanted to like
Mm-hmm.
go off and do it. Like we have a really great arrangement in terms of travel, but that's a huge misunderstanding. One person wants
Yeah.
to go off and have her own adventures, but still stay in the relationship because she's happy with it. And the other person is terrified that she's running away from him.
Yeah, and I think it's got a lot to do with kind of ideas about what constitutes appropriate behavior in a
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah.
I think, the world has changed a lot, and our ideas about what constitutes intimate relationship has evolved, but our notion of how a couple behaves in that relationship is kind of very much ingrained and seen through quite a narrow lens, a lens that's kind of shaped by family history and cultural expectations and gender upbringing. And so when we have this relationship, there's a whole mishmash of ideas. And we have this kind of dominating concept of love, of that we need to find the perfect partner and the one that feels like our other half. And we see this kind of played out again and again in films and Valentine's Day cards and popular culture. And so we have this very high expectation as to what a relationship is. And then also these days, we have this idea of finding our perfect partner. And it's not just they're our partner, it might be someone that's also, they have to be a great lover. They
Mm.
have to be our best friend, or maybe a co parent, or maybe even our business partners. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on that's making up that relationship. And I think we seem to think we know what a relationship is all about, but actually got very high divorce rates.
Mm.
And so there's something going wrong there.
Yeah. And also, there's not a one size fits all. What's right for me is maybe not right for you and not right for the
Absolutely.
woman next
Yeah.
door. Like we're all so different. We have
We're all
different needs in
completely
relationships.
different. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is by Anne Nin, and she says that where the myth fails, human love begins. And I think this kind of idealized relationship is a myth. Love is about, loving the whole person. And I think the idea that solo travel is not part of a relationship is also a myth. I think when it comes to relationships, we kind of need to start creating our own stories and kind of take off the blinkers, so to speak, as to what a relationship consists of. Yeah.
So, what have you found the benefits of solo travel to be, not just on a personal level, but for your relationship?
I think there are many personal and relationship benefits, and they're not mutually exclusive. Obviously, what's good for you on a personal level is also good for your relationship,
Mm.
because one feeds into the other. I think when you travel solo, it's not necessarily better, but I think it's very different. I think it's a far more immersive experience. I think you become acutely more aware of your surroundings. It's almost though your senses sharpen. I think you see more, you hear more, you smell more, and I think you learn a lot more about a place. If I give you an
Absolutely.
example, on my 40th birthday, I went to Sri Lanka for the first time with a friend. And it was a very planned holiday. It was an itinerarized holiday.
Mm.
We did all the kind of UNESCO sites. We did all the things you were supposed to do. We stayed in fabulous hotels, but I felt very empty. I felt like a voyeur. And then the second time that I went by myself. It was 9 months later. I'd made the decision that I was going to go again because I felt like I needed to go again. I traveled my way. I didn't have an itinerary. I wandered as I pleased. For example, I wandered around vibrant markets.
Mm.
I took long, jostling bus rides. For me, travel is the journey is as part of the experience, and I love the journey. So I like sitting on a bus and just listening to what's going on around me and kind of just absorbing the landscape with kind of every molecule of my body.
Mm.
And I felt full, I felt happy. And I think that's a big difference between when you travel on your own and when you travel with somebody else. You don't only get to travel the way that you want to, you get a far more enriching experience. And I think another huge benefit of traveling solo on a personal level is that you learn a lot about yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that when you start to step out into the world alone, and I don't mean that, you have to go on an epic journey around the world. You could be going on short weekend holidays, hiking, whatever it's. But once you step out into the world alone, it's as though your kind of social masks start to drop away. I think we all wear masks to varying degrees with professional masks or with our family or even with our partners to a degree. And I think that when you are on your own, you're just left with yourself. All of that kind of drips away.
Mm.
And it's a very liberating and freeing feeling. And obviously, you can do things that you want to do because you're not accommodating anybody else. I don't know, maybe you want to learn to surf, maybe you want to visit museums. I actually think all that's irrelevant. I think the biggest prize of all is that you get a very, very deep sense of me.
Hmm.
I think once you start to peel back those layers and the masks, it's like there you are. And I think that when you start to really feel yourself authentically, that's where real inner strength and confidence comes from. And that's not just restricted to traveling, it naturally flows into the bigger picture of your life. And I think once you start to kind of know yourself more inwardly, you start to make choices that are right for you. And also, you start to reject things that are no longer kind of in tune with who you are. So, I think solo travel has massive benefits on a personal level. And obviously, that flows naturally into a relationship because
Hmm.
if you are feeling happier and more confident, then your relationship is naturally a happier place to be.
Mm, absolutely. And I think, as you said, solo travel and solo adventures are such a great way to get to know yourself. And I found that the better I know myself, the better I make decisions in my life. And the better
Yeah,
my relationships are, the
absolutely.
better everything is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think as soon as you step into that kind of arena of knowing who you are, you start to make decisions. So for example, with myself, I changed my career in order
Mm.
to have a career that was more me. And I started doing things that were more in tune with me. I started practicing yoga, and it's things like that. Yeah, you start to make choices that are
Mm.
right for you.
So, what other things have you learned about yourself from solo travel?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned is I've always been so I'm definitely an introvert.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and I think for many years, I kind of backed away from that
Mm.
label. It didn't, yeah, I was a bit scared of it. Or
Mm.
when I started to solo travel, when I started to go away on my own, I started to realize that actually being an introvert's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it really helped me to get better, I suppose, at meeting people and talking to people. I'm not the best at small talk, and I think that's quite common with
Yeah.
introverts. But I think that when you're on the road, so to speak, when you're traveling, I think it's an opportunity to let all of those kind of worries go, all of those worries about like, how am I coming across? Do I appear as an idiot? It all drips away. And you're just left with that present moment of dealing with people in the present. And I think what I really learned from that was that I'm actually okay.
Hmm.
I can talk to people and I can get on with people. And I think that's what kind of solo travel also gave me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a really good blog post on why solo travel is great for introverts.
Mm, yeah, it's something that I'm very interested in writing about. Yeah.
I think it's just so much easier. You can be with people when you want to, and you can be alone when you want to.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can basically decide, you can kind of, because obviously we all want to be around people sometimes, and it's
Mm.
that choice. I think when you're traveling solo, it's you can make the decision to interact, or you can decide that you don't want to see anyone for a few days. And that's a really good feeling.
So, what are some of the benefits for your relationship from traveling solo?
Well, I think there are a huge amount of benefits to the relationship. Firstly, I was talking about how it's really good to know yourself. And I think happy individuals makes a happy relationship. And I think when you do the things that you love, you're filling yourself with joy, and that naturally flows over into your
Mm.
relationship. I think we all kind of know people who seem to radiate energy in life, and they're a joy to be around, they're energizing, and you want to spend more time in their company. One of my favorite quotes by Elizabeth Lesser is that if we try to love or lead or work or pray from a dry well, then we'll serve up a bitter cup to those around us and never
Mm.
really live the life we lead. And I think that's really important. It's when you fill yourself up with joy, you then give that out to everybody, not just your partner, but also to the people around you. I also think the old saying, absence makes the heart grow
Mm.
fonder. I think that's very true. It's a cliche, but there's much to it. I always say that if I could bottle that feeling of when I'm returning home from a solo trip and sell it, I'd be a rich woman, because it's that lovely, delicious, lovely, mushy, magical, soul dancing, skin tingling feeling of almost like, when you first met somebody,
Yeah.
you get that again. And I think that's a really, really lovely feeling to have. And I also think the absence increases curiosity again.
Yeah.
I think when we start off in relationships, we are very curious. We kind of want to know everything about the person that we're getting involved with. We want to know everything from whether they like spinach, what they like on TV, what their political views are, etc. But then as your relationship evolves, those routines, especially if you live with them, those routines kind of settle in and things become a little bit more predictable. Maybe you
Hmm.
finish your partner's sentences, that kind of thing. And I think that solo travel gives you that space for the predictability to be given like a really good shake up.
Hmm.
And, routine kind of flies out the window, and curiosity is given room to grow again. And so I think that absence not only makes the heart grow fonder, it kind of creates the space in your heart and mind for revived sense of curiosity. And I think that's a really beautiful feeling. Instead of like, what did you do today? It's like, what did my partner do today? I'm so
Yeah.
excited, And so I think that's really a great benefit. I think solo travel is a great way to also stoke the embers of passion. I think we're all different, but I think that distance can also have quite a good effect on the libido.
Hmm.
And I think that when you're away from somebody, I think the feeling of like really fancying your partner kind of becomes quite supercharged. And I think that's a really lovely thing too. And I think you can also start to find maybe innovative ways to kind of share your passion whilst you're away. And I think that when you haven't seen your partner for a while, there's a very natural tendency to want to share more.
Hmm.
I think it's a way to feel closer, kind of a way of closing that kind of physical gap. And so I think that many couples find that distance, when they have that distance, their conversations become a lot more open. And this could, about how you feel about each other in general, but also it could be about your intimacy, about your sex life. And I think you might start to have conversations that you wouldn't necessarily have at home. So I think, yeah, communication, improving your libido, all of those things.
I think that's really, really important because both people get a new perspective, not just the person who's traveling. I find when I go away for
Yeah.
a few days and I come back, my husband and I tend to have maybe a big conversation that we haven't had in a while or we've been putting off, or because he's had the time to reflect as well.
Yeah, that's right. It provides reflection time for both of you to reflect. And I think I really, really appreciate each other as well.
Mm.
It's about appreciating the small everyday things, but then just really taking a step back and appreciating the person that you're with. I think for me, I feel that the fact that my partner Scott kind of really respects my desire to travel solo, that really makes me appreciate him immensely. The fact that he's kind of worked through perhaps some insecurities that he had. And yeah, I think it's great for appreciating
Mm.
your loved ones more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think now these days, since more of us are working from home, it's
Oh,
probably
yeah.
more important from ever to get some space from each other. Because my husband and I have always worked from home together. So this is
Mm-hmm.
normal for us, but still, like we own a business together. My office is upstairs, his is downstairs, but we see each other all day, every day. So it's
Yeah.
really important for us to every once in a while get some space.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the things, isn't it? Now, I mean, I think a lot of people were working from home, but obviously now with everything that's happened with the pandemic, we've got far more people working from
Mm,
home and you need that space.
mm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, what are some common fears that you hear from people who are in a committed relationship, but they're afraid to travel solo?
I think, firstly, on a more personal level, for the person that's probably thinking about wanting to travel solo, is the idea of that you must be selfish.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a common theme. Maybe you're sat there kind of toying with the idea of wanting to travel solo and, perhaps reading blog posts about what people are doing and that kind of thing. And you start thinking, oh, yeah, that's something that I really fancy doing. But you start to think, well, that I must be really selfish for wanting to do that without my partner. And I actually think this is a trait more common with women than
Hmm.
it is with men due to a range of different reasons. But I think particularly with the way that women are brought up, I think it's changing. I think parents are much more conscious of how they bring up their girls now. But I think certainly of women of my generation, I think girls were kind of brought up to think of others first, to be caring. And so I think when there's something inside of you that you're thinking, oh, yeah, I want to do this for myself, there's almost like this natural reaction to go, oh, wait a minute, I must be really selfish for wanting to do that. But the problem with that is that when you start to push those feelings down, I think that's when you start to feel really not good about yourself. I'm
Hmm.
talking kind of from personal
Yeah.
experience here because I was married in my 20s and 30s, and I met my husband very young. I knew as from a teenager that I wanted to travel. It was really important to me. But because it wasn't something that my husband was passionate about, I pushed it down.
Yeah.
And, I was madly in love with my husband. That wasn't an issue. But I kept pushing and pushing these feelings of like really wanting to travel down. It was like a frivolous kind of thing to want. And the more I pushed that down, the more I became really unhappy. I became really anxious and eventually kind of led to an emotional breakdown, I think. And
Mm.
the marriage broke down. And so it took me 20 years to figure out that actually you need to be selfish.
Yep.
Is it selfish to go after things that bring you joy? Is it selfish to go after things that empower you and actually are really good for your relationship? I think we kind of need to twist this notion that solo travel is not good for your relationship
Mm.
to actually, it's a good thing,
Hmm.
if it's something that you want to do. So, yeah, I think that's one of the challenges that people face. I think another one is around the idea of trust. I think it's something that I read quite often when I've been reading other kind of travel blogs. I've read that solo travel is a bit of a test of trust.
Mm.
But for me, and I think it's understandable that trust kind of comes up
Hmm.
as something that might prevent people from traveling solo. But for me, I don't feel that solo travel is so much a test of trust, more that it actually deepens
Yep.
trust.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that if your relationship is kind of already built on a foundation of trust, then it's something that you can work through. One of my favorite quotes is by Andrea Bonnier, and she says that building trust requires us to open up to the potential of getting hurt. And I
Mm.
think it's when you do open yourself up that actually trust can deepen. I think if we keep in the confines of a cozy kind of comfort zone of what a relationship is, you have your trust there. But I think it's then when you start to expand and open to taking on new things like solo travel, that it becomes an opportunity for that trust to kind of deepen.
Absolutely. And I think some people are naturally insecure. And so even if they
Yeah.
think they trust, they might not. But that's still not a reason to not do solo travel, because
No,
that it just brings it
exactly.
up to light so that they can hopefully heal that and work on that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that if it does come up as something, then yeah, it's a chance to really start to talk about that and work through it as a couple because, if you haven't really got trust, then you're kind of on rocky ground, really.
So, how can people get over these fears? I mean, do they just go travel,
Mm.
or like what kinds of conversations need to happen? Like, how they get over this?
Well, I think, it kind of starts and ends with communication, really, doesn't it?
Mm.
I think it's very important to be very open. I think it's very important, firstly, to be very, very open about what you want to do. So if you're the one that's wanting to travel solo, then talking about the reasons why you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important. And then also talking about any concerns and be very open, very honest about those concerns. I think it's really good if you decide to go on a solo travel adventure, is perhaps starting off with some ground rules.
Yep.
I think sometimes I think it's a good idea as a couple to almost plan it together. There might be activities. So when I say ground rules, I mean, for example, like there might be activities that one partner is comfortable with and the other partner's not comfortable with. It's kind of like having those discussions so that any anxieties are alleviated. So, for
Mm.
example, your partner who's staying at home, if they're staying at home, they might be very comfortable with you booking a trip to go around a museum, for instance. They might not be so happy with you booking to go on a meetup pub crawl. I don't know. It
Yeah.
varies
Yeah.
with every couple. Everyone's got different boundaries, but kind of having those discussions straight off, and also kind of planning when you're going to communicate. I think that's really important. Again, it might differ between each partner. It might be that one's perfectly happy with a few texts or conversation every now and again, whereas the other one wants to have a constant stream of what's happening. It's kind of coming up with those ground rules so that you both feel happy and you both know what's going to happen when you're away. I think that's really important.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think be open to the fact that your preferred communication while you travel might be different to your normal
Yeah,
couples communication while at home. Because my husband and I are constantly, even though I'm upstairs, he's downstairs, we're constantly texting each other throughout the day.
yeah.
Conversations and things. But I remember about 5 years ago when I walked the South Downs Way, I didn't want to be on my phone. I didn't want to be
Mm,
texting. I didn't want to be emailing. And I normally hate telephone conversations. But on that trip, I phoned him every single day because I was like, I don't want to be doing the same kind of communication that I have at home. Like, I want to be in touch
yeah,
with you. I want to talk to you, but I don't want work type communication. So we spoke every day, and that was weird and different and
yeah.
new, and it worked.
Yeah, I'm a bit the same that way actually. I find that when I'm away, I definitely I want to talk. I actually think it's a really lovely thing as well to arrange a phone call at the end of
Mm,
the day. I think it's something that's been lost a bit, especially if, for example, you have a time difference. I think it's
yeah.
quite an exciting thing. It's almost like you get butterflies in your stomach because you're excited to talk to your partner again. And it's arranging phone calls and talking. I think that's a really nice thing to do. And yeah, I think it's everybody's different. Maybe you want to have a Zoom chat or texting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really nice. And also sharing pictures. A lot of times, if I'm out traveling alone, I'll just snap some pictures and text them straight over.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
that's nice too, because you're kind
Absolutely.
of including them on your adventure. They're seeing what you're seeing now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, just because you're away as well, it doesn't mean that you can't still carry on kind of sharing things. There's lots of things that you can do these days. Like I noticed, I think I was on Netflix the other day, and you can both watch a film at the same time. You can
Oh,
do
that's
like
cute.
shared films,
Oh.
or kind of arranging. If you're away for a long time, I think it's kind of nice to arrange like dates,
Hmm.
so that you're still kind of getting together and sharing something in the kind of present time, as opposed to letting all that go.
I like that.
Yeah.
What are some other challenges that can arise for people, and how can they work through those?
Well, I think safety. I think is one of the first things that usually comes up when I've spoke to friends about this, when they talk to their partners about going on a solo travel. And the first thing that most partners will say, well, I'd be really worried about you. And I think that's completely, obviously it's completely understandable. And yes, there's a risk, but I think it's important to remember that there's risks everywhere, isn't there? I think walking alone in the city at night where I live can be a risk. I mean, for
Yeah.
example, I know that you like to go hiking on your
Yeah.
own, which some people would see as quite risky.
Hmm.
And I think that there's a way to minimize risk, both on a practical level and also ways to just alleviate your partner's anxiety whilst you're away through maintaining communication, etc. So I think whilst it's completely understandable that safety would come up, I think there are many things that you can do in order to minimize risk and to put your partner's mind at ease.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about communication. I mean, it
It's
keeps
all,
coming
yeah,
back to that.
yeah, definitely.
So,
It's definitely all about communication. Yeah.
yeah. And I think bringing up the topic of solo travel and then starting to engage in solo travel, I think that can just increase communication in so many great ways.
Yeah, I think it does. One of the things I just kind of want to return to the idea that solo travel isn't what you're supposed to do when you're in a relationship. And I think it's actually a great starting point to open up communication in relationships in general.
Hmm.
I think when we come to a relationship with these blinkers on, I think of what a relationship is, I think we can be very constrained within that relationship. But when we come to a relationship with this idea of like, I bring my crazy stuff to this relationship, you bring your crazy stuff to the relationship. And in it, we're going to kind of create our own story,
Hmm.
our own relationship. And I think then when you create this kind of space, when something comes along that's challenging, rather than automatically going, well, no, that's not right. That doesn't fit into my idea of what a relationship is.
Mm.
If we open ourselves up and see a relationship as like this space for almost like play and development
Mm.
and learning, then when any problem comes along, it's that space to communicate about it openly. I think that's the crux of a good relationship, really, isn't it?
And it's also coming at it from a perspective of co-creating the relationship together rather than saying you need to adapt to my vision of the ideal
Absolutely.
relationship or vice
Yeah.
versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I hate to ask this question, but I know the answer to it because I've read your blog post. How does your partner feel about your solo travel?
Well, yeah, he's supportive. I have to say that, don't I? No, he is. When I met Scott, solo travel was a big part of my life. I'd spent the previous kind of 8 years building a life around travel. I changed my career so that kind of travel was a part, kind of central, and everything else flowed out from that. And so when he met me, he knew that solo travel was really important to me. But saying that, it's not been an easy ride for him. I think when he first started in a relationship with me, he was like, yeah, that's really cool. That's wow, I'm really impressed. But then when it came to me taking longer trips, I think short one, relatively easy to deal with. But when I started to go on longer trips, I think kind of those niggling worries started to creep in. And I know that he found it quite difficult. And he has, yeah, he just wrote his own blog post on it about how he found it quite challenging. The niggling worry of like, am I going to all of a sudden see an amazing man and that's him dumped, because you know what our minds are like, they kind of spiral out of control, don't they?
Like you don't see men every day in your life.
No, I don't. No, only when I travel. So yeah, he had to work through some things. He says they're kind of like his institutionalized kind of ideas about what a relationship is. His relationship experience has always been kind of quite a normal relationship, I suppose, whereby, you see your partner all the time. And I think the longest he'd spent away from a partner before was maybe a week. So here's me suddenly saying, I want to go away for 5 weeks, 6 weeks. He had to do some soul searching. But he had to do that soul searching. And I think he came through it stronger. He had to kind of pull himself apart a little bit. And I think our relationship came through it stronger as well. I think we're stronger because of it, because of the conversations that we've had. And, as I said before, I think that our trust actually evolved and became deeper because of these experiences. So I think it's been great, actually, for our relationship.
Absolutely. So what's the longest you've ever traveled solo in a relationship?
It's about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I keep edging towards a little bit more, but but Scott's still kind of like, 6 weeks is about his limit at the moment, I think. But I think one of the other things to remember is that when thinking about solo travel, if it's something that's very new to you, is that you're not alone. I think there is a lot more people, a lot more people in relationships. I think it's this idea that it's just for single people is kind of going, well, I hope it's starting to diminish a little bit, and that everybody, can benefit from spending very quality time on their own. I read a figure recently by MMGY Global, which is a large travel marketing organization. And they were saying that nearly 10% of American travelers with partners and children are starting to take solo vacations. So we're definitely on the rise.
And I think the more we talk about this, the more we plant the seeds in other people's minds that it's okay. And hopefully they will give themselves permission to give it a try.
Yeah, definitely. It's about that moving away from the idea that it's not what you do in a relationship. And actually, I would sort of like to completely flip that and say, it is actually a really good thing to do in a relationship. And you get many, many benefits from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your top tips or what's your advice to other people in relationships who want to travel solo, but they're afraid to approach the topic?
Well, I think, as I just said, you're not alone.
Yep.
There are lots of other people that are wanting to travel solo. I think there are lots of things you can do for maintaining a strong bond whilst you're away. As I've said, about like communication, maybe planning a date night together or sharing pictures. I think planning the holiday or the trip together so that you're both part of that experience.
Mm.
I think keeping the dialogue going
Hmm.
is crucial. I think when we're all human and our minds can go off and spiral in all
Yeah.
different directions. I think it's once you start to talk about any issues that arise, where you can kind of get through them so they don't kind of spiral out of control.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think there are many things that you can do in order to kind of alleviate those fears a little bit.
And I think give it a try, bring up the topic. You might be surprised.
Yeah.
I think my husband and I have been separated by travel was 3 months. He went on a
Hmm.
trip and it kind of kept getting extended because he had gone to get some medical studies done in his home
Hmm.
country. And it just kept going on and on. And I was like, this was supposed to be a month and now it's 3 months. But, we were in touch and it was fine. But I've always felt a bit insecure about taking a longer trip myself. And I remember talking with some friends earlier this year about Pacific Crest Trail. And that's something I've always wanted to hike alone. And I was talking to him one day, we were in the kitchen, we were just kind of hanging out. And I said, oh, Pacific Crest Trail, like it's always been my dream, but I guess now at this point in my life, I'll never be able to do it. And in my head, I'm thinking, because, I don't want to leave my husband and my cats for 6 months.
Hmm.
And he said, well, don't say that. You never know. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, so maybe it is a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Um, yeah, just get out there and try it. And
Yeah.
I think it doesn't have to be, if it's something that you're kind of thinking about, it's not like you have to go away even for 2 weeks, you
Yeah.
could just go away for a long weekend and,
Yeah.
just try it out and just see
Exactly.
how you feel. It's not for everybody, of course it's
Hmm.
not. But if it is something that's kind of niggling and it's kind of there, I think it'll keep on niggling. I think it's one of
Yeah.
those kind of scratches that you can't,
Yeah.
sorry, itches that you can't
Yeah.
scratch.
Yeah.
If it's there, it's like something that you want to do, then yeah, I think you just have to do it.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree with what you said. Start small. If you've never done it before,
Mm-hmm.
go away for a weekend, go to a spa weekend or go to
Yeah.
a nearby town or go do a writing retreat or whatever. Go
Yeah,
for just 2 or 3
absolutely.
days, see how
Yeah.
you like it. I go camping by myself once a month, and that's like my version of this.
Yeah.
Give it a try, see what works for you, see if it works, see if you need to have new conversations about the topic, and then just tweak from there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you might go away first, maybe on a weekend trip to another city
Mm.
and think it's great, or you may come back and go, right, I never want to do that again.
Yeah,
Great, but I
exactly.
tried it.
Yeah. Now you
And you
know.
can talk about that, and that's fine. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Never know until you try.
No, absolutely.
So, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this topic that I've been wanting to discuss here for ages. Where can people find you online and learn more about what you do and your blog and all the traveling things that you talk about?
Well, I have a blog. It's called Orchids to Olives, and I write on there not quite as regularly as I want to because life seems to take over. But yes, that's where I am. And also on social media, I'm on Instagram, also under Orchids to Olives.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might want to check out one or more of these related episodes. In 430, I talked to Sue Ann Hickey about adventures in solo cycling tours. Episode 414, I talk with Rebecca Walsh about solo hiking for women. 383, I talk with Anne Malambo about how solo travel can change our lives. 374 is a solo show. I talk about how outdoor adventures and travel can help with digital detox. And 367 is another solo show where I talk about finding yourself through solo travel and outdoor adventures. That's all for now. Remember to visit hollywharton.com/438 for the show notes on this episode. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.